I'm Travis Bader, and this is the Silvercore podcast. Silvercore has been providing its members with the skills and knowledge necessary to be confident and proficient in the outdoors for over 20 years, and we make it easier for people to deepen their connection to the natural world. If you enjoy the positive and educational content we provide, please let others know by sharing, commenting, and following so that you can join in on everything that Silvercore stands for. If you'd like to learn more about becoming a member of the Silvercore Club and community, visit our website at silvercore.ca. So a few weeks ago, I was fishing with my buddy and fishing guide, Pat Behan, and he helped me hook into my very first steelhead on the fly, and it was amazing. Had so much fun, and the fishery there is catch and release, and that's completely foreign to me because I'm used to catching a fish. If it's legal size, you bonk it and you go home and eat it, and that's what fishing has always been to me. So I had a whole bunch of questions about catch and release and what's happening with these fish afterwards and the effects of the catch. And he says, I got some answers, Trav, but what you should do, there's this really cool guy. I've done some fishing with him in the past. He's done a lot of work on the subject. He's a biologist and he's a researcher out of the University of Massachusetts. And you really should reach out to him. So without further ado, welcome to the Silvercore podcast, Dr. Andy Danylchuk.
Hey, thanks, Travis. Wonderful to be here.
Yeah. So Pat was giving me some insight, and amazing guy, by the way. He's got so much energy, so full of life. And I absolutely love fishing with him. And as a fishing guide, I'm going to put in the plug, since he is a fishing guide. If you ever have the opportunity to go out with Pat, absolutely take that up. He will make your day. That's a guarantee.
Absolutely. He's a kind soul too. He's got like a heart of gold, and I could not agree more. He's just awesome to be
totally
with.
So he was telling me a little bit about your history and what you do, but maybe it's better coming from you than from me third hand through Pat. So what is it that you do, and how did you get into it?
All right. Well, so right now I'm a professor of fish conservation at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I've been here since 2009. And it was kind of it's never a straight path, right? So like it was a very long, circuitous route to get here. But my origins, I grew up in Southern Ontario, just outside of Toronto.
Nice.
And in the suburbs, not nice, but
good Canadian boy. You got that going for you.
Yeah, exactly. But growing up in the suburbs was interesting for sure. But back, I guess my connection really to fish and nature, and what got me really going on this path was back when I was 5 years old. I'm the fourth in line in kids in my family, and I'm the youngest.
Yeah.
Maybe I was a mistake. Who knows? But when I came along, my parents were excited to, they saved up their money. Total like suburb blue collar family, and my dad was pretty adventurous, and he put us on a plane, and we went to Andros Island in the Bahamas, and that was nice. In 1973, like super remote. It was my first trip anywhere. I was 5. Mm-hmm. And my dad stuck a mask on my face and kind of shoved me in the water. And I was just like, oh my God, look at this. Is like the diversity is beautiful. Check out all these fish. They're barracuda. Mm-hmm. They're not actually going to eat me. It's really cool. And that kind of planted that initial seed in terms of this connection to the water and fish. And then when I got back to Southern Ontario, that there were opportunities for me to start to go fishing. And I went to a relative's trout pond and had this like cobbled together fishing rod with like an elastic band around the reel seat. It was like, I think I was 7 or something like that. And I, these fish were like fed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the relative went to like the local bakery and got all the day old breads and like throw them in these
cookie dough
and really fat. Yeah. They were really plump, and I didn't know that. And so, I casted out this lure and the thing just like ripped the reel off the reel seat and it exploded. And that sort of opened my eyes up to like how powerful fish are and how cool. And we landed it and I got to see it. And I was just like, wow, this thing is like pretty amazing. And it made me realize that there's this really neat connection to fish that we can have. And then growing up again in the suburbs as a teen, I wouldn't say that I was perfect, but certainly, and my family was pretty turbulent at the time, sure. And I found a really good friend and his family who had a cottage out near Georgia, just not too far from Georgian Bay.
Okay.
And so we started bass fishing and fishing for pike and spending a lot of time on the water. And, that's when I really started to, fishing became like a therapy, right? Mm-hmm. And getting in the water and even seeing what you're fishing for first and then going fishing for them.
That is so cool.
And then I got to, my undergraduate and started to learn, and I fell in love with fish, fell in love with the environment, and then started to learn about how poorly humans are handling fish, dealing with fish in the aquatic environment. Growing up around the Great Lakes in the 70s and 80s, it's like, that's the peak of, super fun sites and pollution and PCBs and all that stuff. And I remember starting to go fishing to some of the other lakes in Southern Ontario. And, the ministry gives you this handbook that's this thick, and you have to flip through it. You find the lake and it shows you all the different color codes of like whether you should eat the fish out of this lake, which species, what size. If you're pregnant, don't eat any of them.
Gross.
And I was like, how could we love fish so much and get so much out of fish, yet be kicking the crap out of their environment? And so that kind of really started to, because I fell in love with fish and the environment, I wanted to kind of use my energy and interest to kind of protect what I love, right?
Sure.
And so that was kind of that path that I went on for my undergraduate and my graduate degrees. And I did my undergraduate at Trent in Ontario and my PhD at University of Alberta.
Nice.
And all looking at like impacts of different things on fish populations.
Okay.
And after freezing my ass off in Alberta, at Edmonton for 5 years, then I had a job posting put past me, and it was for a position in the Turks and Caicos Islands in the Bahamas. And I'm like,
can't say no.
I'll try it. Why not?
You can't say no to that.
Can't say no. Yeah. So I ended up, I didn't think I'd get the job. I got the job. And then landed in the Turks and Caicos Islands. And that's when I really started to focus on recreational fisheries. Prior to that, it was in 2000, prior to that move, a lot of the fish species that I worked on were like fathead minnows and pumpkin seed sunfish and things that you could sample a lot of, things that were still important to the ecosystem, but that weren't really, targeted by recreational anglers to any great extent.
Right.
But then when I landed in the Turks and Caicos Islands, I had a friend there expose me to bonefish. And I was like, holy crap. Like, this is like, it was, the environment was amazing. The fish was like the power of that fish. And I completely fell in love with the flats. And then as a scientist, right, because my progression as a scientist sort of increased in my knowledge. And I started to think about like, okay, so I'm watching this bonefish that I'm releasing. It's a catch and release fishery. And I'm seeing all these sharks around. And I'm seeing sometimes a shark eats one and sometimes a shark doesn't. And I started to look into the scientific literature in terms of like, what do we know about handling practices on bonefish? And back then, I think that was in 2001 or 2002, we didn't know anything.
Okay.
And so that just, I started to dig into the literature more and started to recognize that this whole idea of the recreational fisheries as a very important economic engine is understated. And two, that there was then just the beginnings of science that was used to allow anglers to understand how to better handle and release fish for those fish they want to release, because the outcome of that event is like, we want the fish to swim away, to be caught another day, to go back to spawn and do whatever.
Sure.
Right. And then when you start looking into the numbers a little bit more fish are actually released in recreational fisheries than caught, then landed, then harvested. And then that kind of opened my eyes up more to the magnitude and the importance of this development of best practices for catch and release, and also to make sure that they're science-based. So since that time, for the past 20 some odd years now, my research a good part of it has focused on sort of using science and the scientific method to figure out how fish are responding to different handling techniques, and then how we can use the science to develop these best practices that we can put back into the hands of anglers.
Right. So we always, talk about and hear about the effects of commercial fishing on fish populations. What effect, mind you, there's always regulations being put in around recreational fishing, and the recreational fishers say,
Absolutely.
we're not even making a dent on this. Look at all the commercial people. Look at what they're doing. Is that true? Like, what is the impact of recreational fishing on fish populations?
There's a lot of push-pull there, and it really depends on the species, and it depends on the location. There was a paper that came out in, I think it was the early 2000s, by a colleague, John Post at University of Calgary, called The Invisible Collapse. And that, to me, was also a very pivotal paper in terms of my evolution as a scientist, because they had a lot of these case studies where, because we weren't monitoring these recreational fisheries to any great extent, we couldn't actually see the fact that they were declining, because anglers are so passionate about what they do. Participation rates are increasing.
Mm-hmm.
Even if our catch rate goes down a little bit, we've invested a lot in our rods and the trip, and we're still going to go out and fish. And it might take 5 years or 6 years to realize that, wow, like when I first started coming to this lake, I was catching 10 lake trout in a week. And now I'm catching 2. There's something going on. And I think that, that time was pivotal in terms of an awareness, an increase in awareness that recreational fisheries can have an impact. And that it's also something, though, that we don't necessarily need regulations to get a handle on when it comes to the best practices for catch and release.
Right.
And I often also, when I often give presentations at angling clubs, and there's one that I remember so distinctly. It was on the coast of Connecticut, and it was at a surf casting club. And I put up my big, PowerPoint presentation. First slide is like best practices for catch and release. And I could see, and these are all like meat fishers, right? And I could see them all, as soon as I put that up, I could see them all kind of slumping, be like, I'm not going to listen to this hippie, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't do that. So I broke the ice right away, and I said, okay, so how many people here, go fishing for striped bass to catch to keep? And they all like put their hands up. That's me. And I said, great, that's cool. And then I said, okay, and then how many people voluntarily practice catch and release just from a conservation ethic? And there's like a few people that put their hands up. And I said, cool. So for those people that try to harvest striped bass, there's a regulation. So what happens when you catch an undersized fish? They're like, oh, well, we put it back. I'm like, okay. And so what do you hope happens to that undersized fish? Oh, I hope it like grows to be a keeper and all that stuff. I'm like, okay, so 1, you practice catch and release.
Yes.
And 2, obviously the way that you handle that striped bass or whatever fish it is going to affect its fate, right? And it doesn't take a regulation. It takes subtle changes in behavior and maybe just more personal responsibility in terms of making those changes. And I think that goes back to the question you had about this push-pull between commercial fisheries and recreational fisheries. There's a lot of species that recreational anglers fish for that aren't commercially fished, right? And so, when you look at the status of those populations, yes, there's other big impacts happening. There's climate change and there's habitat and all these other things that are affecting our fish populations. But, if you're focusing on a species where there is no commercial fishery, then those recreational anglers that are interacting with those fish, man, we got to start, upping our game in terms of looking at our role in terms of taking care of those fish populations.
So, as a scientist, how do you go about measuring and looking at the effects of recreational angling? Now, I know you were up in the Bulkley a few years ago, and a friend of mine, April Vokey, I think you guys did a couple of podcasts together on some of this, and I heard some pretty cool stories as well about this, but I'd love to hear the process of how you go about actually gathering that research.
Yeah, and actually that project we did on the Bulkley River on steelhead is actually a great example because the process begins with the questions, and the questions for that project didn't come from me. Like scientists, we can yes, I'm an angler too, and I could dream up all these great questions to try to address that I think would be beneficial to the fishery, but it was actually the folks in the Bulkley River Lodge that approached me, and also some folks from different parts of the community up there started to ask questions about if these steelhead are that important and that valuable, how can we potentially change our handling behaviors to increase the chances that they're going to swim away, to spawn, to be caught another day. And so I went up to do a scouting mission. I went up and first met actually with the First Nations, with the Wet'suit and Wetin, because it was all on their land. So it was great to have that connection and to basically get their permission for the study. And then I met with, they kept changing the acronym for the BC Fisheries Forest.
Oh, they're still changing
so confusing.
it. Yeah. Roar or whatever it is now.
Yeah, I know. So I met with, so I went around and I basically talked to people and I did less listening or less talking and more listening, right? I asked questions to understand the importance of steelhead to that community, to the larger community, and to start to think about the dial into some of the questions that were coming from the guides, that were coming from the community about post-release mortality. Is it better to one of the questions that came up, is it better to net a fish or is it better to tail grab?
Sure.
In terms of the handling. And then what happens to those fish after you release them? And so based on that, that initial trip, I was able to then, get a whole bunch of different non-government organizations, industry partners to sign on and say, listen, we put, had some colleagues from Carleton University. I collaborate a lot with a friend from there, a great friend. And we basically created a team of scientists and government agencies and non-government agencies and industry partners to do the study and to actually fund it.
Right.
And because everybody had an investment in it, they felt that the project was theirs. They had a stake in the game. And then following that, in terms of our experimental design, what we did is we worked with anglers. We luckily, we had some great graduate students that spent a lot of time up on the Bulkley River, basically following around people fishing for steelhead. And
sounds rough.
It sounds rough. And again, for as much as we all like to fish, for as much as we'd like to catch all these fish, it doesn't make sense. We're there as scientists, right. And also that engagement with the anglers is super important because we can start to tell the story behind the science. We can start to share our knowledge, and we can also get more questions from them that can shape future studies. And so we started to do work where we looked at blood physiology. So a lot of the science that we do look at how this is not a steelhead,
Sure.
it's a trout. And so we take some non-lethal blood samples to look at how physiologically stressed the fish is to being angled and handled.
So you catch a fish and you stick a needle in and you take some blood, or
quickly turn it over. We use it's a non-lethal blood sample. We basically put the needle into the caudal peduncle, or the wrist sometimes you call it, and take a small blood sample. And then we have meters in the field where we can actually look at blood lactate and blood glucose, which are kind of the main things that we look at as indicators of that stress response related to the fight.
So that's basically just sugar and lactic acid, or the big ones.
Yeah. Exactly. And so blood lactate is a byproduct of anaerobic muscle activity. So your muscles are working, and then you get the buildup of blood lactate, which is eventually a trigger for sort of that muscle fatigue, that cramping. And then blood glucose is that fight or flight reaction, right? So what happens is, and it happens to fish, it happens to us in a scary event. Your liver releases sugar, and you're on a sugar high, and that fuels that. It fuels that fight, and we can look at those physiological parameters and tie that back into the elements of the angling event. And so, and what the anglers, I think, eventually realize is that we're watching them really carefully. We have a stopwatch. We know when the fish has been hooked up. We know how long it's fought for. We take a recording of the water temperature. We look at where it's hooked. We look at if it's bleeding or not. We're also using more and more these things called reflex impairments. And so as sort of global metrics in terms of how well the fish is doing. And some of the reflex impairments, I'm not sure if you've noticed it. One big one is if you turn the fish upside down, how long does it take to roll back over?
Right.
And that's sort of the coordination of all its fin movements.
Okay.
And another one is if, I'm not sure if you've noticed it, but if you take a fish that's used to swimming like this and you kind of put it on its side, its eye tries to track the horizon and tries to track. And if that reflex is lost, that fish, we've shown some other studies that fish is like not in good shape. But there's a whole series of different reflexes that we measure that are linked back to the blood physiology.
So this is like an APGAR test for fish.
It is. It is. Yeah, exactly. And those reflex impairments are neat because we can tie them back into the physiology. We can tie them into the post-release fate when we track fish, and I'll get to that in a second. But then those reflexes are important because you don't have to be a rocket scientist to use them. We can put those reflexes back out into the hands of anglers and say, listen, if you're questioning whether your fish is ready to go or not, if you look for reflexes X, Y, and Z, and they're all there, then the fish is ready to go.
Interesting.
And so it gives us clues in terms of how we can adjust our behavior to ensure that fish, when it does swim away, has the best chance of survival. And then going back to the Bulkley River study, often what we do for a subset of fish is we will then put transmitters on them.
Okay.
And so on the Bulkley River, we used radio telemetry. So a subset of fish had radio transmitters put on them, and then we were able to track their short-term positions, and then also track long-term, like into months after they've been released, and to see how far they've gone. Did they make it up to their spawning grounds? Were there any sort of acute effects early on, and then ultimately were there any longer-term effects? So we have all these different tools in the toolbox that we use for our catch and release studies, whether it's steelhead on the Bulkley River or bonefish in the Bahamas, or we've just finished up going back to blood lactate. We just finished up a great study, a very short study on milkfish in the Seychelles, and because that study was based on a question that came from some guides at the Alphonse Fishing Company, and also something that shows up in social media like every 6 months, where it's like milkfish can fight so long because they don't produce blood lactate, which that was the hypothesis. Right. That's what comes up in social media. And then as biologists, we're like, absolutely not. It can't. There's no vertebrate that does that. Unless they're like some alien species, like not invasive alien, but like from another planet. Right. And we thought, okay, well, we have the tools. Let's go test it. And so we used the same blood physiology techniques, and we were able to demonstrate that milkfish do indeed produce blood lactate. Sure. But there's something different in terms of how they can recover, which I think leads to some of the longer fight times. So it's nice because these tools are quite universal. We can use them on lots of different species, and if we continue to look at how different elements of the angling event lead to different fates for fish, then we can feed it back into those best practices. And this is where kind of keep fish wet comes in. Right. Where, as scientists, we end up writing these scientific, I wanted to see if I had a printed copy around here. We end up, because of our expectations of academia, we publish in scientific journals that are usually, the journal articles are usually really long and boring.
No angler's going to read them.
No, and they tend to be behind paywalls.
Oh, right.
So they're not even free to access. And so, the niche that Keep Fish Wet is filling, and squarely filling across all different species, is basically taking that science, because we're all scientists as part of Keep Fish Wet, the core, and when we're translating that science to make it more accessible, and to use the science to basically develop these science-based principles and tips that anglers can use to essentially, improve the outcome for each fish they try to release, or they plan to release.
So there's a number of things you brought up, and I'll see if I can recall in somewhat in the same order. But the one that really,
and feel free to cut me off anytime too. I know I can start to ramble. So just
you got a ton of information that I get it. I get it. So those telemetry devices that you'll insert into the fish, that's interesting for a couple of reasons. Like, number one, from your perspective as a scientist, it'll show kind of if they're staying alive, if they're going out, if they're getting eaten, if kind of where they're moving. And from an angler's perspective, you can probably get some real insight into maybe best places and best way to start angling for these fish too.
Yeah, well, that's a challenge too. That sometimes we have to be careful about when we're publishing information in the scientific literature about where these fish are migrating and moving to. Right. There is sometimes in those scientific publications, and especially if the questions that were the foundation for the research came from rights holders and stakeholders and user groups, we don't want to be giving all this information away. So sometimes at least the positions and stuff. Right. So that sometimes in our scientific studies, the bubbles that we show in the figures and stuff like that are a little bigger, so you can't quite figure out where,
because that's sort of
the best spot is to fish more.
The dilemma and the dichotomy of what you're doing. You're trying to help the fish,
absolutely,
but in the same breath, somebody could look at that whole research, and if you are very specific in what you're doing, they could very specifically target what they're looking for.
Absolutely, and especially if the science is showing that a certain size fish, bigger fish, are earlier in a run, or seasonality related to movement. We definitely acknowledge that, and we try to be as careful as possible because we don't want to alienate anglers. We're, again, going back to this fact, like most of the people that do the catch and release science, like we all grew up fishing, right? And we all have pictures of us back in the day, like with our bass out and with our pike, with our fingers up the gills,
yes.
that we're not eating, that we're putting back,
Yeah.
right? But we're like, or the big one where you've got you're holding your pike by the eyeballs,
Oh, yeah.
and they're like, oh, I'm going to let it go. Like, okay.
Well, you're talking about the different groups that are involved here, and if Bulkley River Lodge was involved in bringing you in, that's both really smart and I would say probably really brave, right? Really smart because they're trying to get in front of any regulations that come through by having solid science behind it, and really brave insofar as the science might not match up with their expectation or outcome.
Yeah. Well, and I actually, when we're having initial conversations with whether it's the folks from Bulkley River Lodge or the same scenario sort of happened with the Alphonse Fishing Company in the Seychelles, I front and load it and I say, our science may show something that you may not like or you may have to adapt to. Are you okay with that? And I haven't come across a group yet. Maybe I will one day that said, no, we're not okay with that. We don't want to do the science anymore because, the business model for the Bulkley River Lodge is like the steelhead need to be there, right? The business model for Alphonse Fishing Company is that the giant trevally and the milkfish and the bonefish need to be there, and for a long time, right? And when you start talking to a lot of folks, I start to hear a sentiment more and more that yes, the anglers are clients, but the fish are like clients too.
I've heard that.
Like the fish, right? So like I got to take care of that client in the water. If I don't have fish to target, then I'm not going to have anglers wanting to come and fish with me, And so I think that's where I've seen a lot of more attention come even outside the fly fishing world. Yes, a lot of the stuff that we've been doing or that we've been talking about today is fly fishing focused, but we've done a lot of work on species that aren't targeted by fly anglers, and I think because there's a greater awareness these days. I think there is about the fate of the long-term fate of fish populations, and I think there's a growing awareness as well in that. For as much as we hope that there can be policy changes and changes in regulations, we're realizing that like to help protect fish stocks, whatever the species is, that's moving a big rock up a steep hill, right? And sometimes you're pushing a lot to change those regulations, and that could be 5 years, 10 years. Those regulations may not ever change the way we want them to because there's also a political lobby that comes in that could potentially influence the changes and steer us away from science-based or evidence-based knowledge that could guide those regulations. And I think that's where more and more people are, and this is again where Keep Fish Wet comes from, is that like, as we're waiting for those policy changes that can, and management changes and regulation changes that can take a long time, why not take better care of each fish that you're handling, right? And there's no downside, right? Like if you're gonna release a fish, whether it's you're targeting to catch and keep, and whether it's undersized or the wrong species, it still plays a role in the ecosystem. It still may grow, and you might catch it and harvest it later. Or if you're practicing catch and release, every fish that you handle that you're going to release, has value, and that intrinsic value to everybody that likes to go fishing, but also economic value. And if we ignore that personal responsibility, maybe this is me in a bit more of a soapbox, but if we ignore that personal responsibility and keep pointing fingers at the regulators got to change, but I don't have to change, that we can kiss our fisheries goodbye.
Too often people co-opt all of their responsibilities onto a third party like that, and it just seems to be the trend as of late. And you were saying earlier that it doesn't necessarily need a regulation change in order to be effective, but more a general adoption of best practices. Is that where Keep Fish Wet is trying to make that change?
Absolutely. And the fact too that a lot of the principles and tips that have come out of the science of catch and release, they're really hard, difficult things to enforce. Like if a regulator's not gonna, yes, maybe like for striped bass, circle hooks, if you're fishing for bait, that's easy to enforce. For certain species like tarpon in Florida, above a certain size, you can't take tarpon out of the water because it causes physical damage. Those things are relatively easy to enforce. I'm not saying they're enforced all the time, but if it's really hard to think about all the different tips like minimize air exposure, reduce handling time, avoid rough surfaces. Those are the three main principles that Keep Fish Wet uses. It's really hard to think about those as something that a regulator, a state agency or federal agency can put in regulations and then actually enforce.
Right.
Because there's so many people out fishing. There's so many people doing different things. There's not enough conservation agency or agents on the water to actually do that. So it's kind of, it really goes back to changing social norms, right? And how we as an angling community, regardless of whether you're a fly angler or a gear person or you're harvesting or practicing catch and release from a conservation ethos, how we look at our collective responsibility for those fish that we're going to be releasing, and how we can make subtle changes in our behavior to basically say, listen, we're doing the best we can. It's not we're contributing to the solution, right? And we'll continue to have a large voice when it comes to changing regulations, and we'll have a large voice when it comes to other things that are happening, whether it's habitat or climate change. But at least we're providing, we're helping those fish populations be more resilient by practicing science-based best practices for catch and release.
So you're going out and you're sampling different, you're targeting specific types of fish in particular areas and looking for similar kind of outcomes on there. Is there sort of like a blanket rule that you can just sort of apply to them all? Or is it very important that you take a look at all of these different species and look at the subtle differences?
No, that's an awesome question. I think there are species-specific differences, and the science is getting there. We're working away at addressing more and more species-specific differences. But if you distill it all down, a big rule of thumb for air exposure is 10 seconds or less is best.
Okay.
If you look at all the different studies that have quantified the impacts of air exposure on post-release behavior and survival, 10 seconds or less is best. The gold standard is you don't take the fish out of the water at all, and you can still get a wonderful shot. If you're, and this is where it involves creative photography. You don't need a dome lens. You can have your fish in the water. Do you always have to have your face in the picture? Could you have your hands? I think there's some. We actually, Keep Fish Wet provides a lot of information about creative ways to take a photo when the fish is still submerged. But if you are going to say you've caught that prize steelhead and you want to take it out for a couple to get that photo, let the person with the camera call the shots, and it's like let the person get the camera ready. It's 3, 2, 1, lift, click, and it's in the water, and it's 10 seconds or less. And that's, I think, an important guideline. Yes, there are some species that you can leave air exposed for longer. Yes, there are other species that are way more sensitive. And the complexity there, though, is that some species are more sensitive at certain times of year than other times of year, depending on water temperature, depending on water flow. And so if we actually had some sort of matrix of all these different species and when they're more susceptible to air exposure and when they're more susceptible to this, it'd be way too hard for anglers to follow. It would be hard for us to follow. So it's best from a precautionary standpoint, and in terms of our way, the way that we think about conservation, that 10 seconds or less for air exposure is best.
Okay.
And I think that is something we can use, whether it's whether it's steelhead or striped bass or largemouth bass or whatever. The second kind of main principle is sort of avoid hard surfaces.
Okay.
Right? Fish have, a slime coat on them. They have scales. They have slime on them to prevent disease. They have slime on them to make them more hydrodynamic. And anytime that you're dragging them across the rocks, or you're using, dry hands or a glove that has that's super grippy, you're taking that slime off. And not only that, can that cause disease and infection later on, but it also takes energy to rebuild that slime.
Okay.
Right. I always think about a fish as their daily energy budget is, they're out there fishing, or feeding, and they're swimming upstream. And anytime that we exercise them, anytime that we take them out of the water, anytime that we, remove some slime, they have to use energy to rebuild that slime. They have to use energy to rebuild the energetic resources that they use to fight against us. So the more that we can, limit fight time, the more that we can reduce air exposure, the more that we can avoid, destroying some of their fins or wiping off the slime, that there's better chances that they have to recoup those costs once we release them.
Can that slime get in their gills? Because I've seen some people say, "Oh, it's okay if you just leave one gill in the water and you have one gill out, and then it's just breathing." I get that they cycle water through their gills in some fashion and they can extract oxygen.
Yep.
I guess it's a two-part question. From a scientific perspective, how do they breathe, and is there any truth to that, to keeping the one gill in the water?
Okay, so that's a different question from the slide, but how about I pose the question to you, Travis? Can I put you on the spot?
By all means.
Can I put you on the spot? How do I do this? When I gave a presentation in Smithers, and I stood up on a ladder and in an angling shop and said, "Okay, I'm giving a talk about best practices for catch and release. I have a question for you. How do fish breathe?" And all the anglers were like, "Whoa!"
So for me, how do fish breathe? I don't know. They suck water in through their mouth and out through their gills, or in through their gills and out through their mouth, and they somehow have little things that can pick up the oxygen or extract it. That's the best from my perspective.
But that's you're partway there, right? So the lamellae, the gill filaments that are in there are super fine, and there's a lot of blood, right? It's like the alveoli in our lungs, right? There's a lot of blood close to the surface where it allows for that exchange of gases. Okay. But the oxygen is dissolved in the water, right? We don't see it.
Right.
And so what happens is, and this is actually tied into some of the reflex impairments that we spoke about. One reflex that we look for is the coordinated movement. I can't do it well on my plastic trout, but the coordinated movement of when the fish's mouth is open, what they do is their opercula, the gill flaps, are closed. Yeah, they're closed.
Okay.
And what happens is then they close their mouth and they open their opercula, and it pushes water in one direction from the mouth through the gills. And that directional, that movement of water, directional water movement through the mouth and out the gills is important, because that works in opposite direction of the blood flow in the gills. And it's that difference in flow rate that allows that dissolved oxygen to come out of solution to get into the blood. And so that's a really important thing. And the other interesting thing about, and so going to your point about having one gill out and the other gill in, it's okay. They're still respiring a little bit, but they're probably not respiring to the same extent that they were when they were fully submerged. And we can't forget, usually after you've landed that fish, it has just fought. Its metabolism is way up high because it's got that blood glucose. It's that sugar high, that fight or flight response. And just like when we exercise, we're respiring more. And so what do we need? What do we need to do when we respire more? We're respiring more. We need that, because of that exercise, and so do fish, right? So that's the importance of keeping them in the water and trying to keep that water flow over their gills. We also can't forget, similar to us in a way. I mean, our lungs remove carbon dioxide.
Right.
And the same thing for gills. But gills are also important for things like salt excretion, ion excretion.
Okay.
The gills of fish are a little bit more complex than our lungs in terms of gas exchanges, in terms of the services that the gill organs provide.
Right.
And so that's, from an oxygen standpoint, that's great. It's also why we kind of cringe when we see pictures, even when somebody's holding a nice little trout like this and their fingers are slipped under the gill, under the operculum, and they're in the gills. Like, those are super delicate organs, and keep your fingers away from the gills. Support the fish, under the belly and around the sort of the caudal peduncle, the wrist. We have to be very protective of the gills for sure, and that's where that I think the 10 seconds or less in terms of air exposure is important, because the fish are recovering from that stressful event of being angled, and we often are asked, can I do like 8 seconds and then 2 seconds and then go back and like no, it's cumulative, because we also can't forget that fish are wild animals, right? Like they don't want to be held. For as much as we think they want us to hold them and appreciate them, they want to get back to doing what they're doing. You're actually restraining that fish. And so, the more that we, and that's, one of the principles, the third principle for the main principle for that Keep Fish Wet uses is minimize handling time.
Okay.
And it's not, and handling time is like from the time, it's not the time that it's in your hands. It's the time that you've scooped it up in your net. Even if it's in a net, you're still handling it. You've restrained it, right? And it's in a place where it doesn't want to be. And so the more that we can do when you've got a fish in your net or you have a fish at hand, it goes back to basic angler behavior and just thinking ahead and making sure that you've got your pliers ready. You've got, you're prepared to turn the hook. It's also why some of the tips that we include is one like using barbless hooks.
Right.
If you use barbless hooks, there's some anglers that argue like, oh, I'm going to catch fewer fish. Not really. I mean, if you fight a fish well, you're not going to lose it.
Right.
But what it does is it allows you to minimize handling time. It minimizes physical injury to the fish. It also minimizes the chances of you getting a hook with a barb in it, having to dig it out of your face. Been there. But it's all those things coupled together, and thinking about the principles and tips and about how anglers can start to use those to again, minimize air exposure, keep it under 10 seconds, reduce handling, keep your fish away from rough surfaces, and reduce handling time. And collectively, all those things will, the science is showing that it increases the likelihood that that fish is going to swim away healthy. The fish is going to go back to, contributing to the population, and that population will be more resilient to all these other things that are impacting fish populations. So.
Now, you said you had a question asked of you about net or tail grab. Did you come up, did your research show a preferred method?
Yep. It actually, it was a great question, and it was one that we showed that it took less time to actually land the fish when you were using a net, but the handling time tended to be longer. Hang on, I gotta get a sip.
Yeah.
So when you can think about it, you get your fish in the net, and you feel that you have a chance to pause, which you kind of do, and that increases the restraint time of that fish. And often too, what happens is, like, even if you're using a barbless hook, sometimes the hook falls out, or sometimes if you're using a fly with a trailing hook, it gets caught in the net as well. So you're trying to navigate all the net stuff. And what that results in is that fish being restrained longer.
Right.
So and then the opposite of that was true for the tail grab, that it took a little bit longer to land the fish, but the handling time was so much less, where you could grab onto the wrist of the tail or the caudal peduncle.
Mm-hmm.
If it was a barbless hook, you run your hand down the line, you turn the hook, and you're already in the position if you want that picture
Sure.
or whatever, and then you let it go. And the outcome, though, that even though there were differences in handling time, the scientific outcome showed there was no difference.
Interesting.
One had a little bit more of a physiological response of being held longer, but the overall outcome related to the fish that we put transmitters in, it really didn't make a difference. And we kind of like that, I guess, as an outcome. It's important to reflect on it because, there's some situations where it might be impossible to use a net, or there might be some situations where it's hard to tail grab a big fish and you have to use a net. And so when Keep Fish Wet, conveys all these principles and tips, we know that there are nuances depending on the species, depending on where you're fishing. And we also recognize that it's an evolution. It's a personal evolution. The one thing that we really advocate for is constructive feedback, positive feedback, being, we as an organization, as a group of scientists and educators and everybody else involved, like, we don't want to shame other people,
Sure.
because we were all there once, right? Like, we were all, and I think that if we can use Keep Fish Wet as a vehicle to provide a consistent and persistent message related to these best practices for catch and release across all fisheries, and we do it in a constructive way, then more people are going to adopt those best practices, and that's going to change the social norm when it comes to the images that are posted on social media, when it comes to the images we see in film tours and all sorts of stuff that. And also the images that we see on the catalogs of some of the gear manufacturers, right? Like, there's this change that's needed. It doesn't necessarily require regulations, but it requires all of us recognizing that we play a role in the fate of these fish every time we handle one, and understanding that subtle changes in our behavior can make a big difference. And if we all do it, then we're contributing to the greater good.
I have I would think that as a researcher and being very passionate about Keep Fish Wet and what it does and trying to affect a social change, you'll probably find you end up in a bit of an echo chamber where the people around you start naturally surrounding yourself with other people who are like-minded, like values. Do you have a way of being able to measure whether the Keep Fish Wet movement is being adopted and be able to kind of tweak it or not? Because that's a question from maybe a selfish point of view. Is there a scientific way to see what effect that you're making through your efforts, either through social media or through your website? Because that could also be applied to so many other things, whether it be business or anything, right?
Absolutely. And luckily, we through my connection at UMass, there was a graduate student here who I managed to convince to do some work. She's a social scientist and a really good one.
Okay.
That looks at social signaling and how differences in terms of like the injunctive norms that are portrayed in the community, how that ultimately is influenced by messaging or influences messaging. And she is now on the board. She is now on the board of directors for Keep Fish Wet. And
cool.
we were actually have done some studies that actually are still in review, where we're looking at how anglers perceive different images in social media and how they're linked to the best practices, and if there's a disconnect, and how we can ultimately change whether it's the messaging or the images or the tone to allow that message to be more inviting. To also see, are there ways that we can accelerate change just by the way that we communicate the information? And so the one thing that I can say, and this happened a little bit before the transition from keep them wet, which was a kind of a nebulous,
Sure.
wasn't really a thing. It was kind of a movement to keep fish wet, which was a formal not-for-profit. That we had some students in my lab actually do a survey that looked at the number of times that the hashtag keep them wet was being used and how it aligned to images. And, since we started the movement, and especially as Keep Fish Wet started to become more established as a not-for-profit and as the entity for these best practices, that use of the hashtag has gone up, and there's more alignment in when somebody uses the hashtag. It's not a fish that's bleeding and all that sort of stuff. Yes, we still see that, but we're starting to see more alignment between the use of the hashtag and also how our information is being shared by other organizations and how we're partnering. So I think we're getting to the point where I think we've thought up a few other additional studies to try to address that question, but that's something that we'll continue to explore, because it is a changing landscape. That depending on what happens, so there's a campaign that Keep Fish Wet did last year that started it, or they started a campaign called No Fish Dry July.
Okay.
And the genesis behind that was the fact that, man, like July, August, that's when all these big heat waves were happening out west. It's when there were super huge droughts, and fish are ectotherms, and so their body temperature is related to the environmental temperature, and then also what happens as water temperature goes up, their metabolism goes up. So if their metabolism's going through the roof, and then we fish them, that there's a greater likelihood of fish dying because of being caught at high water temperatures. So we this campaign was started to basically change social norms and say and change the narrative. Like, we know this is a factor. From a social media perspective, let's show us pictures in July that don't have to do with the fish. Show us pictures in July about the environment or your fishing buddy, or something about that captures the essence of why you go fishing, apart from getting the hero shot and having to take the picture and the handling.
Grip and grin.
And the grip and grin. And that took off. We had such great engagement tied to No Fish Dry July. And just as a hint, that will be happening again. And it'll actually be bigger and greater. And I think that I think there's more and more evidence that many more organizations and clubs and different groups and industry partners are coming to us to ask advice and to partner to basically have to build that community, the broader community that does. It's not just the anglers; it's everybody that's involved in the angling industry that needs to basically recognize that collectively we can be agents of change. As an individual, you can be an agent of change, positive change, but then collectively, if we all start following these same patterns, that we can have a much greater effect on the future of our recreational fisheries.
That is amazing. And I really love the empowerment of the individual, because so many people think that you need a government organization or an NGO or some group that they can co-opt all of their responsibilities to. And that's not how it works. That's a suck for money. And at some point you'll be looking at the easy answer, and the easy answer is just shut it all down.
Yeah. And it's not one or the other.
Right.
Like, we need both, right? It's all part of the puzzle. And sort of the top down, policy change approach, management change, that's all needed, but that's not going to save it all, right? There has to be the grassroots, there has to be the individual responsibilities, there has to be that connection with the fish and the passion, and that, and we need to look at ourselves in the mirror a little bit more and be like, yep, I know that if I handle a fish out of the water for too long, or if I'm jamming my fish up the gills, that, what science is showing, what Key Fish Wet is demonstrating is that's not good. That a behavioral change is not going to cost me any more money, but guess what? I'm going to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And we also start, and more broadly, we're also starting to see, and this is just an anecdote, I think more and more anglers that have really sort of wrapped their arms around these ideas about best practices for catch and release and their personal responsibility are also becoming more receptive of their responsibility for like habitat loss and recycling and their role in climate change and their role. And so it's kind of like a gateway, not a drug, but it's a gateway into the minds of anglers, and that, their personal action does influence things, right? Both negatively and positively. Sure. And if we so cherish our recreational fisheries and we so cherish the watersheds that they're in, and, both for our well-being and for, the economy and other things, then it needs to start with individual actions, with those fish that we're encountering every time you go fishing. It also still means you have to, be an activist and an advocate, when you see something that's wrong or you're looking for change in policy, you get out and vote, and you get out and, voice your concerns, but you don't just leave it there. You can't forget that there's personal responsibility that's also needed. And so it's I think that, I don't know, and maybe somebody can convince me otherwise, but I think with recreational fisheries, it's the one activity where we engage with nature, where we have that really acute responsibility with those fish that we're handling, where we can like choose to catch it and release it, or choose to catch it and keep it if it's of a harvestable species. And then based on our behavior, we can affect the outcome of that fish when you release it. If you think about bird watching or hiking, like there's different ways we engage with nature where we're maybe not. And if you go hunting, you're hunting usually to like harvest the animal, right? Unless you, there's some other, I've seen there's also people, anyway, we won't get into that. But, but it's the motivations behind recreational angling are pretty diverse. But they do involve the fact that there has to be fish in the water. Otherwise the sport goes away. And there is that connection back to personal responsibility. And that's where Key Fish Wet comes in. And I think that's also where Key Fish Wet, based on the traction that we've been getting throughout the broader global angling community, that we're recognizing, and other people are recognizing, that the scientific based best practices are the best ones, because there's been a lot of investment, and that the science is done objectively, and feeds back into the best practices that 100% demonstrate that, where we know with some confidence that it has a positive effect. If you do this, it has a positive effect. And I think that's where, there's lots of other groups and lots of other government agencies, NGOs that are putting out best practices. But if you look at the genesis behind those best practices, they're anecdotes. They're maybe not based on science. They're developed in other ways. It doesn't mean they're all wrong, but I think what I've experienced over the last 20 years is that what the angling community really needs is that consistent and persistent message, because it makes it easier to remember the information. It makes it easier to remember the principles and tips. It makes it easier when you're going from trout to bass, to striped bass, to whatever. If the principles are all sort of unified, it just makes it easier to employ them as an angler. And you're not getting mixed messages from different groups. And I think that's where Key Fish Wet is really accelerating and being that filling that niche of being that, providing that consistent and persistent message for the angling community.
So what about detractors out there? Are there any people out there that take a look at the work that Keep Fish Wet is? I was in my research in here. There was a Idaho, I think it was. There's a group that put something out that had some contrary opinions, but that was an older sort of paper. Has that one been refuted, or should we talk about that one?
Well, so no, that's fine, and we don't. I don't want to knock the science. And that paper made it through peer review, and that's that's part of the process. But there are some studies that show for certain species it isn't as much of an impact. Right. But there's so many different species that we target, and there's so many different environmental variables that are to be taken into consideration. Right. And so and if there's been probably now, if you do the math, there's probably maybe close to 500 studies that have been done on catch and release, right? If one shows that it's not an impact, are you going to trust the one or the 499?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, and that's, I think that's the approach that I take, like that, we just did a study on giant trevally in the Seychelles, and we used some cool accelerometer loggers. They're kind of like the Fitbits on that we wear to look at tailbeat frequencies. It's a really cool technology. And that science showed that even 30 seconds of air exposure didn't really impact the post-release fate of GTs in the fly fishing fishery and alphons. It doesn't mean that we should still go to that 30 seconds because, if you're fishing in another location where there may be more predators, it just showed that in that context, 0 seconds of air exposure, 10 seconds of air exposure, and 30 seconds of air exposure all kind of showed the same stuff. And it demonstrated that GTs are pretty resilient. And there's been some other studies that have been done on fish out of the same family. Permit are also, from a physiological standpoint, they're pretty hardy of a species when it comes to being caught and handled. But with permit, if you're catching them out of a spawning aggregation and that spawning aggregation has attracted a whole bunch of sharks, it doesn't really matter if that fish is like super resilient to being caught and handled. It's got to now swim through this gauntlet of predators, right? So the context is important, and I think that's also where a lot of the science is going. We're thinking about the context-dependent analyses, like looking at the same species during low water times of year, low flow, high water temperature, high flow, cold temperatures. Trying to find those species-specific best practices so we can hone things a little bit more beyond just the general principles and tips. And we're getting there. So like Keep Fish Wet, based on the striped bass fishery, put out a separate campaign related to best practices for striped bass, because there has been some science, and so there's a species specific campaign. We still fall back on the general principles and tips, but there's some additional things we need to consider when it comes to striped bass, and we're getting there for more and more species. But I'm glad you brought up that study, and yes, we also do, like when we it's maybe too much information. I'm basically the unpaid social media intern for Keep Fish Wet, but it's fun. Yeah. And but last year when we launched No Fish Dry July, there was a lot of interesting comments. They're like, "Yeah, I don't keep my fish dry. I put it on the grill." And it's like, okay. That's awesome. Then have you read the post? No, you just looked at No Fish Dry July. And there's always going to be people that I think don't quite relate with the fact that even if you're catching fish and you're harvesting fish, if there's a regulation that you're going to be releasing fish, there's always a lot of people that I find that like to point fingers at other people as being the problem. But I think collectively over time, if there's this evolution of enough of us that the social norms will change. And as we're fighting the big fights about policy change and other things, that at least we know that we can feel good about each individual angler taking care of fish that they plan to release. And I think that makes it. I think the approach that Keep Fish Wet takes is much more accessible than if it were that is the same information coming from a government agency. Because, for instance, because a government agency is also the agency you pay your fishing license fee to, that could also give you a ticket or take your stuff away. And so, keeping it out as a non-government organization, as a separate entity that and we've had other government agencies come to us for guidance in terms of best practices to partner with us. We've had other groups coming to us more and more. And that's where we have more people coming to us than we can keep up, or we're trying to keep up, which is great. I mean, to me, that's a reflection that
it's working.
Keep Fish Wet is working. It's on the mark. And during No Fish Dry July, Trout Unlimited picked it up and said, "This is awesome." They wrote pieces about No Fish Dry July. Fly Fishing International, there's all these bigger groups that are recognizing that what Keep Fish Wet is doing has incredible value, and actually the engagement and the opportunities for engagement are increasing, and that the distance between suggesting behavioral change and making behavioral change is really short, right? You just need that sort of recognition by the individual, but like, wow, these scientists have shown that, by minimizing air exposure and keeping it less than 10 seconds, I'm going to be doing a better part for each fish. I'm going to go ahead and do it. And if you embody that, then that you have confidence in that behavioral change, and you're more likely going to do it. Totally. Right? If we're able to demonstrate that. So I think collectively I think there's a strong future for Keep Fish.
Awesome. I've got a couple easy questions. So you go into the fishing store and they've got a couple different types of nets. One's going to be your fabric net, and one's going to be kind of your rubbery net. The rubber net's going to cost you more money than the fabric net. And people look at this and say, do I spend the more money? Does it make a big difference? What should I do? What's your perspective?
Luckily, there's been some science done on different nets, and the flat rubberized net makes a huge difference. The Walmart, Kmart, Canadian Tire Special that is the knotted nylon, that results in more fin fraying. It can actually get behind the gills. It can do gill damage. It is much more impactful than a flat rubberized net that is relatively slick when it gets wet. There's less opportunities for fins to get through the holes. There's enough science. If you can afford it, or you save up for it, then a rubberized net will result in fewer injuries.
Okay. Here's another easier one. Let's say for steelhead, what I'm looking at, you're talking about physiological responses that the fish will have, and you named a couple of them, like the eyes tracking the horizon. Are you able to give a quick point form of a few of these physiological responses that people should be looking for?
The reflex impairments, absolutely. So the reflex impairments, the big one for us that I think is the easiest is at the end, when you're ready, if you say you've got it close to you, and if you can start to roll it and it rolls over on its own, that righting reflex relatively quickly, it's got enough coordinated movement, it's got enough of its faculties to recognize that it's upside down, and it can do that coordinated movement to bring itself back up. The other one is that we call it the head complex, and that's the coordinated movement between the mouth moving and the gills moving.
Okay, right.
So if the mouth is going like this and you have coordinated movement with the gills, that means it's trying to move more water over its gills.
So mouth closed, gills open.
Yeah, and in sort of that combination, that
Right.
sequence, ideally with the steelhead, right? You're in moving water to help with that recovery. You want to, put the head of the fish into the water flow, so that you have the water going in the mouth and out the gills, not the other way around.
Sure.
And so we've got the other one so we've got the other ones that we do, and it really depends on the species, is one called body flex. So if you start to take your weight, say you have the fish in the water and you start to use your arms to reduce the weight, the gravity that the fish is feeling, does it flex its body, or is it just like, right? Is it just limp? So body flex is one that anglers can also use. And then also pretend you have your fish, and it's kind of harder with steelhead because you also don't want them to start to run again. But we do this for smaller species where you can actually, if you start to like pinch their tail a little bit, are they trying to kick away? Right? If you start pinching their tail and you have that tail reflex. So we've got loss of equilibrium or how quickly it can take to regain equilibrium. We've got the mouth and gills, so the head complex. We've got body flex. We've got tail grab. And then the other one I talked about is that the eye rolling. That one we've shown in some studies that if that eye does not roll, and there's some species where the eye will never roll. It depends on the species. But I had a great photo come in today from the person that does social media for Fulling Mill. And he's actually also a guide in New Hampshire. And he sent a picture of this fish, and it's a close up, but you can see that the fish is on an angle, but its eye is tracking the horizon. So you know that fish's brain and it's physiologically, it's like dialed in, and it's like, I don't want to be rolled over. I want to go back that way. That's another really good indicator. And it's, and some of these indicators, depending on water temperature, depending on the size of the fish, they might be harder to measure or harder to look at. But I think anglers need to do the best they can with some of these reflex impairments, because it'll tell you if the fish is ready to go or if it's not. So say you like, you roll your, we hear and see so many examples of the people that are holding on for fish for a long time and thinking, I'm going to hold on to it for another 5 minutes because the more I hold it, the better it gets. And the fish is like this. And they're like, I'm trying to hold it. I'm going to do this fish better by holding on. This drives. So my wife, Sasha, is the executive director for Keep Fish Wet. And that's one thing that is a really pet peeve of hers. And it actually is a pet peeve of mine, but more hers in that, like, this whole idea, like holding on to a fish longer is going to be better for that fish. It's not always the case. If it's got, good opercular movement, if you go like this and in 2 seconds it's like this, like get it on its way. As long as there's no predators around, you're not in the salt, like do the fish a favor and get it on its way. It doesn't need to be recovered more. Certain species, like, billfish, tarpon, big things that are like fight to exhaustion, sometimes they need more recovery. But this is also when, like, if you're fishing with a guide or you're on a chat with a chat group on social media, Facebook or whatever, try to, before you even go fishing for a new species, look at the different techniques that people are using to recover fish. Compare those to the best practices that Keep Fish Wet conveys, and be like, okay, now I know when I'm going to go for sailfish, it's actually in the southern part of the United States, it's illegal to take them out of the water. But if that fish needs to be recovered longer, I'm going to probably be working with that boat captain to basically be keeping that fish's head into the current. We're going to run the boat until it's, got its reflexes, and then we can let it go.
What do you see as the future for catch and release?
Yeah, I think the future in the short term is that I think, and this seems kind of maybe a little bit, it's not jaded, and it's not. I think that there's based on the uptake and the ease of uptake for these scientifically generated best practices for catch and release, I think there's a strong future for Keep Fish Wet in terms of being that persistent and consistent message across all these different fisheries. I think that there's a greater growing awareness that individual responsibility is important, especially with all these other impacts that are happening to fish populations. I keep going back to the big elephant in the room, climate change, right? Last year it was droughts. This year we've got massive floods that are closing out Yellowstone, right? And I think those floods are also hitting Alberta and Saskatchewan, right? Like that understand, given that our watersheds and our global ecosystem are under all these other pressures, I think that more and more people are asking, how can I play a role? How can I help be an agent of change? And I think that's I'd also see that more and more people are maybe becoming a bit more disheartened about like policy change and the rate at which those changes happen, taking down the dams in the Snake River, right? We're fighting for that Pebble Mine. It's all important to fight for, right? We're all important to do that, but it takes time. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And I think that more and more groups and people within this sort of recreational fishing community are recognizing the value of each fish that are in their hands, and that through those basic changes in behavior that we can actually have a great benefit on the future of that individual fish, and that contributes to greater resiliency in the face of all these other threats. So yes, there are places where and a concern that gets into this, and again, this could be a topic for even another podcast, when you get into sort of animal welfare and do fish feel pain, we haven't really touched on that. I'm going to
say yes.
I think that there's, well, again, another podcast, because there's so much to go into that. But there's some places like in Germany, catch and release is illegal because they feel that there's, that law was put in place because it was felt that if you're catching a fish, you've caused enough distress in it that it's inhumane to put it back. So you have to dispatch the fish. But I've had casual conversations with a lot of people that fish in Germany, and they call it the oops factor. And they basically, they know that the fish is better in the water. They don't need to, they don't want to dispatch the fish.
Oops,
and
I dropped it.
As they're handling I dropped it. And and I've actually heard some anecdotes from people that were actually caught for practicing catch and release, and they took it to court. Don't anybody quote me. I heard it from somebody.
Yeah. I read it on the internet.
But even the judge kind of threw it out. And like, if you can argue that the value of that fish is so much more important in the water, contributing to a healthy ecosystem, and if you're using best practices for catch and release and you're minimizing stress on that fish, then maybe catch and release does have an important place. And I think it does. And going full circle back to like, the conversation that I've at the beginning of my presentation in Connecticut here about like talking to the meat fishers versus the people that practice catch and release. We all do it. We all do it. And I think we all do it. And if you're practicing to catch to keep, and you're not putting back an undersized fish, that's what's going to get you in trouble, right? That's where, that's why the laws are put in place and the regulations are put in place. And I think what I'm also seeing is that, since Keep Fish Wet rebranded or Keep Fish as a not-for-profit, that I'm actually seeing more and more angler groups that are predominantly meat fishers basically starting to say that, wow, we're playing a role and these best practices are important. And of course, we're going to be a part of the solution. It doesn't mean, and we're quite open about this on the website. Like, we like to eat fish and we harvest fish sometimes too. Like when it's legal to do so, you know, we like to harvest fish. We're not taking a very super hard stand and say you got to release everything you catch, otherwise you're a bad person.
Right.
It's like, wow, if for those fish that you intend to release, if you use these scientifically based best practices, those fish have a better chance of survival, and we're just then you're part of the solution to helping to keep those populations healthy and safe. So,
Andy, I am so glad you're able to make the time to be on the Silvercore podcast, and very thankful to Pat for making the recommendation and pointing me in your direction. Thank you.
Oh, Travis, no problem. It was great being here, and I enjoyed passing on what I know, and and I look forward to being back on.
Oh, you will be.